Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm Sam Whittier for the Creative Scale-Up Programme in Greater Manchester, and it's absolutely fabulous to be joined today by Sophie Milan, who will be hosting this session. So I'll pass over to you, Sophie.
Fab. So we're looking at the power of publishing and content creation. Specifically, what does it mean for the future of books, content online, and do the mass media and the online content creator community collide, or do they interact and collide and merge as one? How do we as creatives come together to form the future of publishing and creation? So I'll just go around and let everyone introduce themselves. We've got Ed, Denise, Matt, and Sam, all talented creatives and publishers of some sort in their own right. So if everyone could give me a little background on themselves, we'll start with Denise, as you're directly below me on screen.
It's always really strange with these online things because you don't know which way around the room to go, do you? So well done. No, delighted to be here. So I'm Denise Turner, and I am Insight Director at Newsworks, which is the trade marketing body for all of the national news brands in the UK. So for about 6 years prior to that, I was in planning and insight in media agencies. So I've seen things from different sides of the fence, and I'm passionate about the power of publishing and the power of content, really, because at the end of the day, you know, people don't want to just look at a blank space, do they? They want to look at some fantastic content. So that's me. I've been doing this for about the whole thing about 30 years. So that's a bit scary, actually.
And what about you yourself, Ed?
Hello, everyone. I've managed to turn my camera on, so that's the first success for me. Yeah, I'm Audience and Content Director across LC's regional titles. So everything from the Manchester Evening News to Cornwall Live up and down the country. And I've worked in the regional media industry for about 10 years now. Before that, I set up a hyperlocal site for Preston in Lancashire, where I live, which is Blog Preston. So I've worked for big media, and I've started something up myself as well. And yeah, really interested to hear what people have got to say, and looking forward to a good debate.
Fabulous, thank you. And my local lad, Matt, down the road. I'm in Wakefield and you're in Barnsley. Introduce yourself.
My name's Matt Coyne. I'm the creator of something called Man vs Baby, which is a online social media blog type thing. I'm also the author of 2 books based on the blog, and I've written previously for The Guardian and GQ magazine and The Telegraph and various others. So that's me.
Fabulous. And last but not least, our organizer, Sam.
So I have not got the same pedigree as everybody else on this table. I am manager for the Creative Scale-Up Programme in Greater Manchester. So I'm helping creative writers gain knowledge and sector experience to help them get onto platforms and help them gain the business experience to gain investment.
Awesome. I'm Sophie Milan. I'm a multi-platform journalist. I started out in the grassroots of local press, and then shimmied my way up into documentary making for Channel 4 News, and went through the back door of entertainment. And then now I hybrid and straddle both worlds of the mass media, writing newspaper columns, and also social media, like Matt, creating content online in my own mental health and wellbeing blogs and vlogs. But most of all, I have a passion for storytelling and soulful content and sharing it in the most powerful ways possible, whether that be through the mass media or through the online media. And that's what I'm all about. It's the future, I believe, is utilizing both industries, both worlds, both skill sets. So to start with, I wanted to start with you, Matt, because you kind of straddle between both worlds. How does that work?
A lot of the time it doesn't, to be honest. It's quite a difficult thing to straddle, because in some cases, like the online stuff is not taken as seriously, whereas kind of the book publishing and the writing articles and that stuff seems to be taken a lot more seriously by the industry, which is kind of bizarre, given that the online stuff reaches exponentially more people and is exponentially more successful. I mean, so I do straddle both. I initially, Man vs. Baby came about because I wrote a single Facebook post, basically, and that went as these modern things do. That went viral, and partly because it was then picked up by the regular mass media, and then slowly through TV and everything, and that original post reached like 20 million people, 25 million people now. And that was like 5 years ago. And it was just on the basis of that one single post that then publishers got in touch and asked if I'd fancied having a go at writing a book. So I created Man vs. Baby as a way to try and, because no one was going to buy this book, so I kind of needed to tell people about it. So I started Man vs. Baby because I knew that I needed to reach an audience before the book was published. So that's what I did, and I kind of Man vs. Baby evolved to such a state that it kind of overtook the book and overtook what I was writing at the time. So it's a strange kind of fusion that I found myself in of straddling sort of traditional media, the newspaper stuff, the magazines, the book writing, and the social media stuff. I enjoy both equally. And I'm probably one of the few people who treats both quite as seriously as one another. But maybe that's changing a bit.
I definitely think it's a different way of consuming content for different people on different levels, and it comes to accessibility for me. I know I've made documentaries or written newspaper columns that have a lovely grounded reach, but nothing like some of the videos I've done, which is kind of production-wise awful content on YouTube, has reached 2 billion. And it's actually valuing both the production quality and also having that reach. And like you say, is it about audience first? Is it about serving first? We'll go to you, Denise.
I think that's a really valid point, because I think that in this world of kind of platforms, we can often think that we're marketing to devices, but actually at the end of the day, we're marketing to people, and we're creating content for people to consume, to read, to watch. And I think we sort of get a bit lost in the fact that you can consume that content across platform. You know, I was reflecting on, excuse me, I was reflecting on Marshall McLuhan's The Medium is the Message. And actually, if you read some of the backstory around that, there was actually a mistake in the title, and he said it was the medium is the massage, because the message, the medium, that the way that you consume the message is massaged by where you consume it. I'm sort of mangling my words, whatever, massively. But I think that, you know, content and platform intersect so much, and there is definitely a style for different platforms, but that content definitely needs to be consumed in different ways because it does different things. And at the end of the day, back to your original question, sorry, I've waffled on, but the audience is the most important thing. At the end of the day, it's people that you want to, you know, if you're creating content or you're doing advertising, it's people you want to respond to it, not a bot at the end of the day. And we've all had too many of those things in our lives, you know, with scam and all the rest of it.
And how do you find that, Ed? Obviously coming from a world of newspapers which are rapidly evolving, what's business been like for you over the years?
Matt touched on it there with it. You wrote a Facebook post and then suddenly this whole thing kind of exploded and happened. And I think that's a trend that we're seeing now in the traditional journalists and media companies. It's about who your individual journalists and writers are, and it's about their personality starting to come through. You know, if you think back sort of 15, 20 years, then journalists were fairly anonymous. You know, they were just kind of bylines on a newspaper page. You know, now they are living, breathing human beings who are publishing their content, who have a personality. And what we find at Reach is those journalists who you know, spend that time kind of on their profile and thinking about who the audience is that they're writing for. They see really on their pieces. And you know, it's been fascinating that you know, Matt's story is not unique. You know, actually a lot of the time when we're looking at who can contribute to guest pieces that we've got, you know, social media is that place where you start, because you've got people who've already got an engaged audience and following, who can then appear you know, on the Manchester Evening News. And these days that could be in a two-way video stream. You know, that content is as important as the written content now. And I think that's the other big shift that we're seeing, is just how content is being used and consumed is just completely different, even just to 5 years ago. So I think it's a really positive shift, because you're starting to get more variety in the voices. It's not all you know, 40-year-old blokes who've done their journalism training in X, Y, and Z in London. It's, you know, you've got far more diversity in the voices that are now writing for both our regional and our national press, and I think that's really important going forward if we're going to stay relevant for the audiences that we seek to represent.
100%. Definitely don't fit into a very good keyhole of a journalist. And Sam, as a creative leader, how do you navigate this kind of world of content creation and being creative whilst also having to straddle all these different mediums?
I think it goes down to your personal choices, doesn't it? So I think everybody's touched on different elements of media in the last 12 months. Look at TikTok. I never would have thought that dancing to something would have been interesting to people. And then I've got my daughter taking pictures of herself 100, 200 times a day. I was growing up with a text message that was literally 15 pence and it was coming out. Now it's, well, that's a text. It says that it can be misinterpreted. Whereas a facial expression, you're smiling about something, it gives a different meaning, yet the same message may have been the same. The initial conversation could have been exactly the same. So I think depending on what you're looking to achieve will be dependent on what platform you actually start to use. So we can start seeing it already now. Facebook is for, I don't want to say it, an older generation like myself. Twitter is now more used for journalists to find that information. It's a quick resource. TikTok, I'm still getting my head around that. I really am. You know, there's loads of new things coming out, and again, whatever content that you want to try and understand, that's where you're going to go to.
100%. And we've heard a lot about the kind of scary future of AI technology and how it can kind of rigidly intersect people and dissect us. But what about in terms of the two worlds of, well, one world, hopefully we'll find that synergy, where is it improving in terms of diversity? I know, I think you've touched on it as well, Denise and Ed, about the fact that actually it's getting more diverse voices, like you were saying, Ed, into the media. It's something that I know personally that I've discovered. If it hadn't been reaching out for a vlog during a mental breakdown, whilst having the traditional career on paper, that I probably wouldn't still be working. And so for me, it's definitely been a personal journey of navigating the two, and also from my own background. But is it making it more accessible? Is it making the news and media world more creative? Feel free, anyone, to fire away.
I think it's about AI and humans, because I think it's that intersection that's really important. And I'll tell you a little story before I sort of go on to comment more specifically. But we run some awards every year, and it's about creativity in newspapers in all their forms. And we did an experiment a couple of years ago where at the same time as humans were judging the awards, we also used an AI company to assess the last 5 years of the awards to see if they could predict the shortlists and the winners. So we had those two things happening in parallel. And obviously, looking at kind of content and words and all the rest of it and what made a successful entry. It was really interesting because the AI program predicted very accurately the shortlist to within one or two. But the winners, there was definitely a human and a magic spark that was needed. Do quite well on the winners. I think it only predicted 1 out of the 6 category winners. So I think there's definitely that sort of balance of using technology to really sort of shortcut the process where you can, but you need that human spark and that diversity, because actually there are so many different variables in terms of the people that work in the industry, the type of content they like to write about, the type of content the audience like to read about. So I think we are getting to a point where, and this is where I think the challenge comes with social media, because there's so much about personalization and you want that balance between stuff that's relevant for you, but also stuff that people like me read, or I see people like me in the content that I read or the content that I watch. And I think that's a really fine line to tread, and that's where you need that human kind of magic or human spark, if you like.
And I think that's where grassroots journalism has really always played an anchoring part for me as well. And Ed, obviously you work in local news, and traditionally they are a lot more welcoming, shall we say, and more inclusive of communities. And how do you navigate the complicated kind of challenge of diversity, but most importantly, inclusivity of all your different audiences and all your different readers?
I think just going back to the AI point, I think it's really interesting how much stuff can be done for journalists now. We have tools that will ping you as soon as something has happened somewhere, and that's great that you've got all these kind of systems working in the background. But fundamentally, the job of the journalist still remains the same, which is, can we verify that? And also, can we explain what's actually happening? Because there may be a video of something going on, but it all might not be exactly as it seems. So AI is great as a prompt, but then you still need to commit the act of journalism to go and check things and see what's happening. And you very often see on platforms like Twitter or other places things spreading very, very rapidly, and then those platforms will very, very rapidly take them down, because the way that it's being constructed is not as it seems. It's not been verified, it's not been checked, and then when it does appear in the mainstream media, it's actually a very different story. And in terms of diversity, I think that's something at Reach that we've in the last 2 years in particular we've made some great strides on. We've still got a lot of work to do, and we see diversity in a number of ways. It's about gender, it's about ethnicity, but it's also about social background and about access to opportunities. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the discussions around inclusivity and diversity. So I think one is about looking at the entry routes into newsrooms. So making sure that we now offer things like apprenticeships. We didn't before. So you had to almost go through that kind of formal university training route. Or potentially now, you almost go through the influencer route. You build your own community online, and then that is the thing that attracts a mainstream media provider like ourselves to then offer you work and offer you employment. But I think that's a big step for a 15, 16-year-old finishing school thinking about becoming a journalist, to have the confidence to do that. So I think there's a huge part to play for organisations like Reach. We have newsrooms across the country, teams across the countries, and some great role models to train our journalists to make sure that we're as inclusive as possible by offering lots of different routes into the newsroom.
And how have you found that, Matt, coming from both sides of the world? Like, how did you find, you said you weren't like treated with as much respect when you're doing your online content as opposed to when you're doing your kind of more traditional media content?
It's interesting. I think the truth of it is that, so going back to what Ed was saying, yeah, as a provider in traditional publishing, you've got to reflect your own community, and that requires you to make sure that you're certainly employing in as diverse a way as you possibly can. But the traditional media hasn't always been very good at that, and like Ed said, that things like Instagram influencing is given opportunity to take the gatekeeper out of that and become somebody who can't be ignored and can't be denied a voice. And an awful lot of people from BAME communities and LGBTQ communities have specifically used those platforms for that. And then once they've grown, where their appeal is undeniable, when they have an audience, then the traditional media will come knocking and say, come and do something for us. Well, that needs to be reversed in some way. Ed's got the right idea, absolutely, in terms of going out there and finding, because these people have been, and an awful lot of people, whether it's working class background or BAME backgrounds or LGBTQ communities, have been discouraged from applying for these roles and discouraged from taking up these roles. So it requires then people who are in that position of authority to go and find them, not wait for them to apply, because they've been discouraged for decades from applying. So it requires you to go out, find them. It's very, very easy to find them now. It's very, very easy to find people who appeal to an audience because they have got 200,000 followers above their social media platform. You know whether they're any good now. It's very, very easy. You don't need a CV to find out whether somebody's can appeal to an audience anymore. And I think we all need to do a bit better at that. Certainly, traditional publishing does. Publishing, in particular in terms of books, is very, very London-centric. It's very, 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 very middle class. And traditional news media as well. It speaks volumes that an awful lot of the larger news agents, whether it's like television news or the Guardian or whatever, that they have a northern correspondent. So they'll have a correspondent for the royal family, they'll have a correspondent for COVID, and the correspondents for everything. But then they'll have one that covers the whole of the north of England, as though we're all still up here, using outside toilets and eating our young. Community journalism is absolutely the way forward, and Ed's approach to it, a more localized, I think, is definitely the way forward. National media is, to a certain degree, is in a death spiral because of this. Because what they're doing is this is a little bit controversial, so excuse me. But more national media is in a real crisis point and in a death spiral for one very simple reason. If you throw up a paywall, you better make sure that what's behind that paywall is worth buying. And if you get rid of everything that makes your USB great, which is good investigative journalism, good editorial, if you sack all those people, what's behind the paywall isn't worth anything. So that's why it'll be in a death spiral. I honestly think local journalism is absolutely the way forward. Reflecting your own communities is absolutely the way forward. And that synergy between influencers and people who can demonstrate an audience and demonstrate an ability to appeal to people, that synergy with those people and that talent in your community is definitely the way forward. That's just my opinion.
I completely agree with that, and I think Ed. So I'm quite fortunate to know Ed from a number of years now. But Blog Preston is exactly that. It is local, insightful information that's relevant to the audience. And what was it? It was even a few years in, it was overtaking brands that had been there for 100 years in content analytics. So was it a million impressions in a month with Blog Preston because it was relevant, written by locals for locals. And I think, again, content delivered on an online platform. And then there was videos coming into play from another organization. So I think exactly right. Local journalism will trump national.
And what do you all reckon that local community journalism will look like?
I think it's important that we retain scale. I work for an organisation that has huge titles and smaller titles as well, and it's I think to Matt's point about kind of someone appoints a northern correspondent, and you go, well, we've got fantastic journalists at the Liverpool Echo, at the Teesside Gazette. You know, it's almost as if they don't exist. You know, we streets of you know, of Sheffield telling those stories, not just us, but you know, other regional media groups as well. And you're right, Matt. It always, you kind of think, really, and I think it's important to retain an audience of scale, because it's important that you know, the journalism is well read and is accessible to people. So there may be a place for charging for some content, absolutely, but I think particularly even just have to look at this week with the whole debacle over the 8 you know, local lockdown areas that weren't local lockdown areas, but are they local lockdown areas? That's been local journalists driving that. You know, that's Jennifer Williams, Manchester Evening News, Tom Earnshaw at Lancs Live, a number of other colleagues at different regional media asking tough questions of government departments, and the government department turning around and going, oh yeah, we didn't mean to do that. You know, and that's the fundamental, that's the most important thing, you know, in journalism, is holding to account. And that happens from having good, strong local journalists that are well read. And the danger is, if you're not well read, that you don't, and you can't seek, you know, those answers that you need to get. If you're well read, they know you've got an army of readers behind them, and that's where, as a journalist, you can make a massive difference. And we see that time and time again.
And how do you? Yeah, sorry, Denise. I was just going to bring you in, actually, because how do you navigate that world where you've got people who might not be traditionally well read, but then they're scripted in other platforms and technologies? How, as the mass media, can you utilize that?
It's really interesting, because I think it goes back to sort of the platform discussion, but it just, Ed was talking about sort of, you know, the government and lockdowns and all the rest of it. We've been working as a total national and regional and local news brand industry with the government since the beginning of the pandemic. And they came to us and they said, we want to use you as an industry, rather than, you know, doing lots of different, and Ed, you're probably aware of this, but rather than using lots of different titles individually, can you come together as an industry? And to be honest, I'd never seen it quite way before, but basically 600 titles across the country, all working in partnership. And because, if you remember, you know, we all started the pandemic, but the messaging was quite do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this, or don't do this generally. And actually the government realised that they needed to find a channel that would allow them to engage with the you know, the UK population and really bring them along on this journey. So that's what's brilliant, because actually we've harnessed the power of both local and national journalists to write content that explains what you're meant to do or not do and why. So things like, is it okay to send your child back to school? What are the issues? And one of the recent ones was about the vaccine, you know, and some of the ethnic communities struggling with accepting having to have the vaccine, and could we address some of the questions, not just from ethnic communities, but young people saying, well, I don't have to have it because it's only affecting older people, or all the rest of it. So I think that's a real sort of demonstration of the power of journalism, both on a local and a national level, to create engaging content, whether that's in print or online, because it was both. And also it used, you know, to Ed's point as well, it used video. So it used a multitude of ways of communicating with people. So I think that bit of different, you know, different channels have different roles to play. And if you can harness the power of those different channels together, you create something really powerful. And we've seen some fantastic results in terms of trust in the messaging that people are reading in their news brand of choice, whether that be local or national, and, you know, awareness of what the messaging is meant to do, and also a sort of a sense of, I know what my part is to play, but not in a because somebody's telling me, but because I understand it. And I think that's the engagement that we see with readers of both sort of local and national titles. So sorry, I've probably gone off tangent a bit again, but I think it is that sort of sense of that relationship is vital, because that's what sort of, you know, creates the trust in the stuff that you're reading.
And I think it comes back to that core creativity and the whole feeling of collaboration and actually creating content and telling it in a journalistic but powerful way. Sam, as someone who's come from the kind of world of the media and is now like leading businesses as well as a creative leader. How are audiences changing, do you find, when it comes to consuming creative content?
This is again a very difficult question, but I think we got to think about content not just in the terminology of publishing. We got to think of content as script writers. We've got to for film, for TV, for games. They all have stories, and I think by encouraging storytelling at a very young age, then it helps feed every one of our industries. And that's what collaboration's about. That's what it's about: sharing opportunities, sharing stories, and driving engagement, irrespective of the actual content delivery platform.
And how does everyone consume content themselves? What's your go-to mode of the content consumption?
Facebook for me.
Depends whether my daughter is in the house or out of the house.
I'd love to hear more on that.
Well, if you want to actually read anything that is print based, you need a bit more time. So if you've got a 4-year-old charging around, then it's a quick look at the phone to check in on headlines or an email newsletter in your inbox. Whereas a magazine or a printed product tends to be more of a if she's being shipped off somewhere for a few hours, and that gives you that time and space, or you happen to be out of the house and having a coffee, you get that bit of time to just read. But I think podcasts and podcasts is where I increasingly get a lot of my kind of news from, and that I guess is because there's just that immediacy to them. They're easily accessible. They're on your phone. I think we'll see that growth in audio and video continuing, and particularly the younger generations as they come through, they're used to consuming content in an audio visual way, and too long didn't read is the that's the shorthand for the generation coming through. So how do you summarize everything that's happened with the local lockdowns that weren't local lockdowns in the space of 20 seconds for someone to just catch up on it? That's the question for the future of journalism at all levels, I think. Because people need that depth, but they want it in the space of 20 seconds.
And what about yourselves, Denise and Matt?
Where do I consume?
No.
Sorry, Denise, go ahead.
Go on, Matt. No, you go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Where do I consume? I'm sort of one of these people who heads down rabbit holes. So I'll start with a tweet, and then I want to know more about that. So then I'll click on that and head towards BuzzFeed, and then I'll fall down into Wikipedia, and then I'll find some sort of obscure abstract at the bottom of Wikipedia's footnotes, and then I'll head down that, and before you know it, I've not slept, and for about 3 years, and I'm getting up with a 5-year-old at 6 o'clock in the morning, wondering where my day. So yeah, I'm classically internet obsessed, I'm afraid. So yeah, I tend to end up down strange rabbit holes most of the time.
I think we all are, actually, to be honest. But I'm listening to this talk of 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and thinking, well, I've got a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old, so actually, I'm completely the spectrum. So I do have time, and I often find myself with time to read. I'm definitely I'm an app on the tablet type person for different news brands. That's where I quite like just sit, because I don't often have time to go out and sit and read the paper again. I've got teenagers, time is still of the essence, but at the weekend it's definitely more, I might just go and grab the paper and have a read, because I quite like that as it's a relax. I love reading like recipes and gardening and things like that. So it's not always just about hard news, if you like, and I think that's what we've got to remember. It's not always about the serious stuff. It's about celebrating stuff in the community, or celebrating stuff, or helping you live a better life, or whatever. Having said that, I do like a podcast. I do say, that is, if I'm trying to, just make sure I go for a walk every day, put my headphones in, listen to a podcast. So I think the beauty of technology is that we can consume content in lots of different ways, but it's still content that we want to consume, isn't it? So just Ed, Matt, just be reassured, this time will come, don't you worry.
I'll be dead by then.
Well, I stash all my newspapers and magazines and books in the toilets, so I'm often on the toilet. Whereas I like creating content for online platforms, writing and blogging and whatnot. I'm an old school. I love my newspapers and my reading self-help books, normally with kids. But just to finish off, obviously talent is the future, and I'm not just talking about one age demographic or one demographic. It's diverse talent. How do we ensure that the future of publishing and content creation, and whatever it looks like, will harness this talent going forward, especially up north?
I think we continue doing what we're doing and encouraging people to do what they love. It's slightly different to Denise and to Ed. So I have a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, and a 16-year-old coming on 17. So I'm seeing the Snapchats as the consumptions. I'm seeing the TikTok and trying to get dragged into that. But I'm also seeing my 3 to 4-year-old using YouTube as a way of learning. And I'm just like, I'm astonished that she knows her way around and how to pinch the screen out to make it how she wants to do it. So we continuously encouragement, but never forgetting that actually the kinesthetic feeling and reading the books, understanding the basics of the English language, learning the correct ways of saying things. So if we encourage that, again, keep reading to your kids at bedtime. Let them tell their little sisters and little brothers a story, reading from the book. Let them make them up. Play, imaginative. And I think that will continue. And by doing that, I think we'll continue nurturing storytelling as a whole for a long time to come.
Exactly. I think that's a nice way to finish up. Is the future hopefully is more accessible storytelling, more inclusive storytelling, more soulful storytelling, but also having some fun as well as creatives. We like to play too. And just to finish off, where can we all kind of get involved with what you guys are doing? You can give us your handles or your bylines.
You can find me at Man vs. Baby if you're bored.
My Twitter handle is at Ms. Denise Turner. So do come and find me on Twitter, and I'll happily engage with people.
Awesome. Ed?
Yeah, and I'm _Walker86 on Twitter. And obviously I'd encourage you to read any of our live news brands that we've got up and down the country. We've definitely got a website covering somewhere near you.
Awesome. Sam?
You can find me here till 5 o'clock and then in the networking room afterwards.
I'm at Sophie Maylan, and then all my mental health and wellbeing writing is at Mama May blog. But most of all, thank you so much for joining us, everyone on the panel, everyone watching. We'd love to read back your comments, and most of all, see how we can create this collaborative, hybrid, exciting, creative approach together. And if anything us creatives can do is bring together the world through conversation, communication, and collaboration.